This is a Christmas story that I wrote many years ago, unpublished, and for the first time read publicly in 2009. It's a delight to be able to present it to the North Country, and hopefully someday I can say that it will be in book form and available. It's called Sparkles and Shiner. It's fiction, but I hope you'll find it inspirational and rather beautiful. Twins are special. This is a story about twins. Her name was Sparkles. His was Shiner. She was 3 inches tall. He was 4. They were Christmas tree ornaments. Mr. Morrison made them. He was a retired school janitor who loved to fashion things of wood for the children who lived in his neighborhood. Mr. Morrison lived in Morrisonville along the river. Morrisonville was named after his great-great-great-grandfather who had settled there in 1805. Mr. Morrison had a woodworking shop behind his house next to the fire station. He had a wooden leg he made himself after being injured in the First World War. He worked for a long time in the Morrisonville school, fixing things and keeping the school sparkling clean. Everybody loved him there. He was always kind to the children and to their teachers. He kept the desks and the floor spotlessly clean, and even washed the blackboards when they became streaked with chalk. Mr. Morrison finally had to retire and spent a lot of time in his little shop by the river. The Morrisonville children and their parents stopped by often just to chat and to watch Mr. Morrison make things. He was a wonderful storyteller as well. They enjoyed hearing what life was like in Morrisonville when he was a little boy. Besides, when the snow was snowing and the winter wind was blowing, it was cozy in Mr. Morrison's shop. He had a big round stove that burned chunks of wood. They could get close, but not too close, and warm up from the chill outside. He showed them how to make wooden toys, wagons, wheelbarrows, trucks, trains, and at Christmas time, ornaments for their trees. He never charged any money for what he did. He just made things because he liked to, and gave them away because he loved to see people smile. Jocelyn and John Spencer were 9-year-old twins. They lived on River Street. They were very poor. They had 5 other brothers and sisters. Their dad was sick from breathing dust in the mill over the years, and their mother was very tired from cleaning houses for other people. Jocelyn and John stuck pretty close together. They often stopped by the shop to talk with Mr. Morrison after school before heading home to do their chores. He always gave them a bowl of warm soup from the pot he kept simmering on top of his wood stove. He would also cut them each a piece of homemade bread with butter that he had churned himself. 1946 was a particularly hard year for the twins and their big family. An older brother, Ray, had been drafted into the Army, went off to fight in World War II. His mother and father received a telegram saying he'd been lost in action. He never came home. It was very sad for all of them. It wouldn't be the best Christmas they ever had. Jocelyn and John's mom had spoken quietly to them just before bedtime the night before. She told them they didn't have much money for Christmas presents. She would try to knit hats and mittens. And if things went well between now and Christmas morning, perhaps Santa would bring them an orange and some walnuts for their stockings. They were the youngest of all the children, and they loved Christmas more than any other time, even better than Halloween and Thanksgiving. It was, after all, when the baby Jesus was born. They didn't expect to get expensive gifts like the other children. They knew there was love in their house, and that's what really mattered. One day, about 2 weeks before Christmas, they got a surprise when they knocked on Mr. Morrison's shop door and he welcomed them inside. He was just putting the finishing touches on 2 wooden objects in front of him. He had a tiny paintbrush in one hand, and as they came closer, they could see what he was doing. One item was a little girl with golden curls and a dress with polka dots. Jocelyn had always wanted a dress with polka dots. There were also what appeared to be shiny black patent leather shoes and white socks. There was a red bow in the blonde hair. Mr. Morrison dipped the brush into light brown paint and delicately painted a few freckles on the pretty face. Then he reached into a container nearby and took a tiny pinch of shiny things between his thumb and forefinger. He sprinkled them on the fresh paint, and they stuck wherever they fell. There were tiny bitty pieces of tin foil, and when he picked up the object and turned it toward the bare light bulb over their head, the whole thing sparkled. "Good then, let's call her Sparkle," said Mr. Morrison, as he set the newly completed wooden girl down on the bench in front of them. He reached for a hand drill and made a small hole in the very tippy top. He cut off a length of colored string, poked one end through, and tied a knot so it formed a loop for hanging. "It's an ornament. It's a Christmas tree ornament," giggled Jocelyn. "Indeed it is," said Mr. Morrison, "and it's yours to keep." Jocelyn was speechless. Her very own ornament. Sparkles. She loved it. Mr. Morrison then turned his attention to the other object on the workbench. It was a likeness of a boy, a handsome lad with bib overalls, fine work boots, a cowlick on the back of his head, just like John had on his own head, and a baseball cap on top. It appeared to be complete, but Mr. Morrison looked straight at John and saw the black eye he got when he got hit with a snowball playing with his buddies on the school playground the day before. Without missing a beat, Mr. Morrison grabbed up another small paintbrush, dabbed it in some black paint, and made a neat circle around the right eye of the little wooden boy. He held it up next to John and smiled. "Perfect," he whispered. "I think we should call him Shiner. What do you think?" "Yeah, I guess we should," laughed John. "Sparkles and Shiner. I think they must be twins, don't you?" Mr. Morrison was pleased with his creations, but he had something else up his sleeve. "They belong together just like you two," he said. I really believe they should go home and hang on your Christmas tree this year." John was just as thrilled as his twin sister. But they wondered, how come neither of the ornaments had a mouth? As if he could read their lips, Mr. Morrison said, "Be patient, children. That part comes later." It was time to leave. Mr. Morrison gently placed each of the homemade ornaments into an empty cigar box and nestled them side by side in a bed of cotton he had placed there. They fairly flew across Main Street, turned right on Mason Street, and left onto River Street, with their feet sending swirls of new snow in every direction. They were both out of breath when they burst into the kitchen, panting and speaking in gulps when their mother asked them what all the excitement was about. She was delighted with their presence, just as much as they were, and told them they could go right into the parlor and hang them on the tree. It wasn't the most beautiful Christmas tree in the world. Actually, it was kind of small and just a little scraggly. But it was theirs. Their older brother Ron had cut it down near the quarry and dragged it home 2 days before. It was set up in the corner next to an old upright piano their mother played whenever she had the chance. They'd all gather round and sing Christmas carols such as Hark the Herald Angels Sing and Silent Night. Jingle Bells was another favorite. Jocelyn and John took a sleigh ride once on their Uncle Ben's farm in Saranac. They loved it when the bells on the horse jingled and jangled, and steam came from the horse's nostrils as she breathed the cold winter air. Jocelyn and John, along with their brothers and sisters, made other decorations to join Sparkles and Shiner on the tree. They popped corn and put it on long strings. They did the same with cranberries. They used crayons to color paper stars and little Christmas trees and pictures of Santa Claus to hang on the branches. Just before they scurried off to bed on Christmas Eve, they looked one last time at their tree. It was beautiful. It was really beautiful because it was their tree. They each touched their own special wooden ornaments one last time. Jocelyn placed her forefinger on Sparkle's nose and smiled. John ran his own finger along the silver-colored buckles on Shiner's overalls, and he laughed out loud. They were both very happy. They knelt next to their beds and said special prayers that night. They didn't ask God to bring them presents. They asked Him to help their dad to get better. They asked Him to give their mom a good night's sleep. She looked so tired in the kitchen as she got a small chicken ready for cooking the next day, and darned pairs of hand-me-down socks so the twins would have something warm on their feet to go out and play in the snow. As they climbed into their beds, they prayed that the little children all over the world would be as happy as they were right now. Mr. Morrison had told them when he handed them their ornaments that as long as they had love, things would turn out okay. They believed it. It was midnight, and the kitchen wall clock struck 12 times. It was also the magic time when Christmas Eve became Christmas morning. It was the time when there was much more magic in the air than Santa and his toy-laden sleigh. With each gong from the clock, the children's pretty wooden ornaments grew 4 inches. Well, actually, Shiner grew about 4 more inches after Sparkle stopped. And what a few moments before had been thin wooden bodies began to fill out until they became very close to looking like real children. Without a sound, they each reached up and lifted the loop of string at their heads and off the branches of the Christmas tree. They then held their hands and arms straight out toward each other. When they did, something even more amazing happened. It was kind of like a shimmering beam of light flowing from their fingers, from her fingers to his and back again. Shiner touched Sparkle's nose, and Sparkles touched one of the silver buckles on Shiner's bib overalls. The beam of light grew stronger and brighter. Smiles formed on their faces, and they went to work as if they were in a great big hurry to finish up a very important job before the sun came up over the top of River Street Hill and shone into the Spencer living room. Sparkles and Shiner could create an object just by tracing its outline in the air with the sparkle and shine of that magic beam. Sparkles drew a giant teddy bear, and as she drew her hand away, it turned real underneath the tree. It was exactly as tall as Jocelyn. Jocelyn had always wanted a teddy bear, but never dared to even dream about really owning one. Then it was Shiner's turn. With a great flourish, he traced a track completely around the tree, careful not to touch the teddy bear's toes. On the track, he created a train, a long train. There was a very real-looking steam engine, a coal car, 5 passenger cars, a flat car loaded with lumber, 7 box cars, and a beautiful red caboose at the end. John had always wanted such an electric train, but never dared to even dream about owning one. John and Jocelyn had seen pictures of the train and the teddy bear in the Fat Sears catalog on the coffee table. Jocelyn even cut out the teddy bear and used paste in school to glue it to the inside front cover of her reading book. John had often used his imagination to make believe he was the engineer on a real steam locomotive, pulling the cord on the whistle as they approached the crossing on Beckwith Street and waving to the children who ran out of their homes to greet the train. Now, they didn't ask for such extravagant gifts, but because they had wished for good health for their family and happiness for other boys and girls, their wishes were being granted. Sparkles and Shiner made terrific presents for the other Spencer children as well. For their father, there was a special gift. It was a small box wrapped in green paper. In another box, wrapped in red paper, was something sure to please Mrs. Spencer as well. Sparkles and Shiner filled all the stockings hung from the fireplace mantel. Besides, they used their special powers to make brand new wool socks for every member of the Spencer family and heavy winter boots for all of them. On every present was a note that simply said, "Merry Christmas with love from Sparkles and Shiner." They finished their work at 4:45 on Christmas morning. It was lucky, too, because each time they traced something in the air, their magic beam grew a little bit weaker. At the end, it was so faint as to be barely visible. Shiner raised his hand and touched his sister's nose while the last spark fizzled out. Sparkles used the forefinger on her right hand to rub one of the buckles on Shiner's overalls, and a tiny gleam remained for just 1 second and died. In the dark, they reached up and hooked over the string loops on the branches on the tree, and they both gradually grew smaller and smaller until they returned to their original size, 3 inches and 4 inches tall. The Spencer twins were awake at 5 o'clock. They didn't dare to move, though, until they heard their mother stir. They listened as she went downstairs and got a fire going in the stove to warm the kitchen. It seemed like it took forever. They were ready to explode, but still they managed to keep their eyes closed and make believe they were still asleep until their mom crept into their bedroom and stood at the foot of their beds. "Are you two awake?" she whispered, in her wonderful, soft, best mother in the whole wide world voice. And they fairly leaped from under their quilts and hugged her so hard it's a wonder she didn't break. "Oh, kids, I had the best sleep ever," she said, as if amazed that she was able to finally get a good night's rest. Together they went into the other bedrooms and awakened their brothers and sisters. A few minutes later, their dad came out, rubbing his eyes and joining into what was now a Spencer family Christmas Day parade. Imagine the wonder when they saw what was under their tree and in their stockings. Nobody was more surprised than Mr. and Mrs. Spencer. They'd gone to bed feeling that they could only afford a few plain and mostly homemade gifts for their children. Now look! The living room was jammed with presents for everyone. The stockings were overflowing. There was true Christmas joy in the Spencer household that morning. Mr. and Mrs. Spencer waited until the Spencer children had finished opening their gifts before they finally looked at their own. The paper fell to the floor. Mr. Spencer unfolded what appeared to be a colorful card with a replica of John's little wooden ornament named Shiner. Inside was a poem. "Christmas Day, magic ray, make him breathe the healthy way." As soon as he read it, a tiny beam rose from the picture. It stopped right at his chest. He hesitated, took a deep breath, and exclaimed, "My lungs! They're clear! Listen to me! I feel 20 years younger!" Mrs. Spencer was so thrilled she almost forgot to open her own little box. On the lid was a picture of Sparkles. Inside was a shiny gold charm bracelet. 7 golden figures were attached. They were amazing replicas of her 7 offspring. She was thrilled beyond words. While the children danced around and laughed, their mother and father shed tears of pure happiness and gratitude. "Stop," said Mr. Spencer. They were obedient children, but it took a few seconds for them to do what their father had asked. The room grew very quiet as Mr. and Mrs. Spencer fell to their knees. Each of their children did the same. Softly, Mr. Spencer began to pray. "Thank you, dear Lord, for what you've done for us on this Christmas Day. We're not sure that we deserve it, but we all promise that we'll work extra hard in the coming year to love you and to love each other. Amen." "Amen," they all chimed in. Mrs. Spencer rose to her feet and headed into the kitchen to start cooking the chicken and to finish baking the pies. "Come here, quick!" they heard her call, and they ran to see what she was so excited about. There on the table was a huge turkey, all stuffed and ready to roast. Surrounding the turkey was everything else they could want for a perfect Christmas feast. They could only hug each other and cry some more. Meanwhile, John and Jocelyn just happened to glance up at the tree at the same time. Twins do things like that, you know. Jocelyn looked at Sparkles. John stared at Shiner. They each pointed to their respective ornaments. Can you guess what they saw? Sparkles seemed a little larger than when Jocelyn hung her there the night before. Shiner did too. Another thing, they were higher on the tree this morning. And each ornament had a broad smile on its face. That must be what Mr. Morrison meant when he told them to be patient. They looked at the ornaments, and they looked at each other, and they didn't have to say a word. They both knew that Sparkles and Shiner had been somehow responsible for all of this. Twins can read each other's minds, you know. Well, it was a fine Christmas at the Spencers that year. The children had learned a lot about the power of love and vowed to spend a lot of time doing good deeds for others in the new year ahead. Mr. Morrison died on his 89th birthday, and the Spencer twins attended his funeral with their parents. He had meant a lot to all of them, and everyone with whom he'd come in contact throughout his long life. His shop remained just the way it was always, and his son vowed to keep it that way as a tribute to him. The son was also a woodworker, and he invited the neighborhood children to come in from time to warm by the fire and listen to the story of Sparkles and Shiner. John and Jocelyn remained very close as they grew up, graduated from high school, finished college, and they both attended medical school. They both became doctors, having decided years before that they must help others as long as they could. Every year, they made a ritual out of hanging the old wooden ornaments on their Christmas trees. They married another set of twins in a double wedding. They moved into homes near each other and very close to where they grew up on River Street in Morrisonville. Eventually, both had children of their own. Jocelyn's first was a boy, and John's was a girl. The babies were born just a week apart, just before and just after Christmas. It became customary to celebrate their birthdays on the same day, December 24th. It just seemed easier that way. When they were 9, their parents brought out 2 old cigar boxes. John handed his daughter the ornament named Shiner in the original box from Mr. Morrison's shop. Jocelyn handed her son the ornament named Sparkles in an identical box she had found in a garage sale. They were told the story of that magical Christmas back in 1946, and they were asked to promise that they, like their parents, would hang the ornaments on their own Christmas trees and pass them on to their children in the future. Of course the children agreed and were totally charmed by the little figures of Sparkles and Shiner. They brought the ornaments home and placed them lovingly on their own Christmas trees before going to bed. As the clocks chimed 12 times at midnight, everyone in both homes was sound asleep. Almost everyone. Shiner reached up and unhooked the loop of string from his branch. Sparkles did the same. Shiner grew larger with each chime of the clock. Sparkles did the same. When the clocks finished striking, Sparkles and Shiner raised their arms at exactly the same time in their 2 houses. In the air, they drew beautiful, bright, sparkling, shiny hearts and placed them on the very top of each Christmas tree. For the first and last time, Sparkles and Shiner spoke, but it was really just a whisper. Merry Christmas. They both said at precisely the same time. Then they affixed themselves to their Christmas trees and shrank to their original size at precisely the same time. After all, they were twins.